All right, good morning and welcome everyone. Welcome to the final session of the 2021 Citrus Research Board Summer Webinar Series. I'm Stephanie Pereira with the UC Statewide IPM program. I'm also here with Dr. Melinda Klein of the Citrus Research Board, who will introduce our speakers, and Peter Cosina, who will run the poll questions and troubleshoot any technical problems. Please also note that this webinar is designed for growers and agricultural pest management professionals. Master gardeners can certainly benefit from participating, but the management methods presented, especially pesticides, are not to be followed without a clear understanding of their legal use in home environments. Okay, so with that, I want to pass this over to Dr. Melinda Klein, who will introduce our first speaker. Take it away, Melinda.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone, and please welcome our first speaker, Cindy Fake, Regional Farm Advisor for Placer and Nevada counties. Cindy has served as University of California Cooperative Extension Horticulture and Small Farms Advisor in Placer and Nevada County since 2001. Her horticulture programs provide information and training on sustainable crop production, soil, irrigation, and pest management. Cindy's small farm programs focus on economic viability, beginning farming, and business planning. Her citrus research focuses on pruning and mulching to reduce tree stress and build healthier soils and trees. Today, Cindy will provide a regional update. Go ahead, Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. So I do serve Placer and Nevada counties, but I also serve citrus throughout Northern California. And I'd like to briefly touch on three topics today: a little bit about citrus varieties, some observations from the 2020 and the start of the 2021 citrus seasons, and a little bit about mulching in citrus. So as many of you may know, traditionally citrus in Northern California has been primarily Satsuma mandarins and navels, but we do pretty much produce the entire range of citrus species and varieties, albeit on small acreage. Mandarins and navels continue to dominate the industry, but in the last 5 years, many growers have diversified into other varieties and species, including early and late mandarins, for example, S9 Satsumas, also Tango and Gold Nugget, as well as the whole gamut of specialty citrus. A lot more Meyer lemons have been planted, blood oranges, limes, including Australian finger limes, kumquats, among a whole range of other species and varieties. So I'd like to make a couple observations about the 2020 citrus season in Northern California. As many of you know, mandarins tend to alternate bear, and 2020 was a heavy year for many of the growers. But demand for local citrus was higher than usual due to the pandemic. So many growers in Northern California had a really outstanding year because of the interest in buying from local citrus and from farm stands, farmers markets, etc. So in 2020, the harvest started early, in part due to the pall of ash from the fires to the north and south of the citrus growing areas. Normally, trees and fruit slow down in July and August due to the high heat and low humidity in our area, but the ash cooled the temperatures and increased humidity for about 4 to 6 weeks, which let the trees keep going and resulted in an early harvest. On the other hand, the negative impacts of the ash and cooler weather included one, a much heavier than normal fall flush, which then resulted in higher populations of soft-bodied insects such as leaf miners, aphids, and some of the scales. Ash also accumulated on the tops of fruit and some leaves and was not washed off in orchards with overhead sprinklers nor by rainfall. So we observed some bleaching of the peel and satsumas, most of which are harvested November, December, January, probably due to the soluble potassium in the ash. What we saw in later season varieties such as Tango and Gold Nugget was much more bleaching of the peel in both the foothills and the northern Sacramento Valley. This is not a normal phenomenon here. And that we are pretty sure that's what caused it. So this year, 2021, our citrus bloomed early, and our new climate norm seems to be not only dry, but at least in the foothills, a lot more frequent and stronger winds throughout the year. And our spring growth flushes started showing symptoms of water stress, the vertically curled leaves, before the flush was even fully expanded. And that was pretty consistent across most citrus orchards in Placer County, indicating some water stress. It's generally minor, but it can get worse. So that leads me to mulching, which is a very timely topic given our current drought stress status and the early heat wave that we just had last week. So we've been conducting mulching trials in mandarin orchards for the last 5 years in Placer County. And our results show not only cooler soil temperatures and maintenance of soil moisture, but mulched trees also show less water and temperature stress and reduced fruit drop. There's also about a 20 to 30% reduction in water use due to longer intervals between irrigations. So mulching has become a pretty standard practice in foothill citrus, as it's a really important tool to manage variability of our climate. It does need to be applied to moist soil, best done in spring before high temperatures start. And irrigation also has to be adjusted to prevent overwatering the trees. But mulch could be a useful practice in this time of drought. So something to think about going forward. And I think if there's questions and there's time, I can answer a couple. Stephanie?
We don't have any questions at this time.
All right.
We actually do have one that just came in. This question's from Esther. Do you have published research for your study?
There's a couple of things online, and there have been a couple articles. We do not yet have a journal article, but it's in process.
Okay, we have more coming in, but I kind of want to save those for the end, just so we have enough time for the other speakers. Thank you. Melinda, do you want to introduce our next speaker?
Sure. Again, thank you, Cindy, for that excellent review of things going on up in the north. Hopefully we'll have a little less ash on the oranges this year. Coming up next, we have our second set of speakers, Dr. Tracy Kahn and Dr. Mike Roose. Tracy Kahn is the curator and Juvedon Citrus Variety Collection Endowed Chair for the University of California, Riverside Citrus Variety Collection. As part of her position in the Botany and Plant Sciences Department, Tracy authors publications and provides presentations on commercial citrus varieties and citrus diversity. Mike Roose is a professor of genetics in the Department of Botany and Plant Sciences at UC Riverside, where he has served since 1982. His program has released 8 citrusine varieties, including the hybrids Gold Nugget, Shasta Gold, Tahoe Gold, and Yosemite Gold, and low-seeded selections from mutation breeding, Tango, Daisy SL, Fairchild LS, and Canal LS. Tracy and Mike are co-principal investigators on a Citrus Research Board funded grant to conduct integrated citrus breeding and evaluation research for the California citrus industry. Today, they will provide an update on their multi-location lemon, Scion, and Rootstock trials. Thank you for your talk today, and I'll hand the microphone over to them to begin. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tracy, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'm happy to be with you today. As Melinda said, our title today is New Cultivars for California's Diverse Growing Regions, and we're going to focus on an update on the results of the multi-location lemon, Scion, and Rootstock trials. What you see here is a list of the co-PIs, Mike Roose and myself, that you're going to hear from today, but Glenn Wright has also played a very big role in what we're going to actually speak about today. But we have a number of other PIs, Peggy Mock and Danelle Seymour, who is a new citrus breeder at UCR. But we have many other wonderful team members who keep this project coming and are experts in lots of different characteristics. Okay, and this is some of our team. You see Glenn Wright on the right. We were affectionately call him Dr. Lemon, and has played a big role in both what Mike and I are going to speak about today, but there are many other people who've played a role, such as Claire Federici plays a big role in this particular project, and all of us work together on Harvest. Tony Siebert and Corinne Terrell, and who are on my lab group, but many others like Zach, who is a rootstock breeder, he also plays a big role in what Mike's going to talk about. Okay, so you understand that our project involves citrus breeding, and one of the things I want to talk briefly about so that you can understand what I'm going to show you is that all plant and citrus breeding actually involves 3 essential steps. One is the creation of a variation, and you're creating variation so you can select that variation. So you can do it through mutation, either random mutation, such as finding a bud sport, or directed, as in directed mutations that you can create. You can do hybridization, which is crossing to make crosses between 2 types that you want to be parents, or you can do gene transfer. The second essential step is selection of potential varieties, and this is basically on what you see, or the phenotype, and the observable or measured characteristics of that phenotype. But it can also be based on DNA markers, either of known markers or known gene sequences. And then the last major step is trials. And what we're focusing on today is trials of evaluations from multiple locations for commercial traits. So that's what we're focusing on today. So the central aim of this project is to develop and evaluate new Scion and rootstock cultivars and their appropriate cultural practices to meet the needs of the California citrus industry. And this project is really complex in that it has 9 different steps, and some PIs are more involved with one step than others, and all of our staff work together. And some of these steps or these objectives all have multiple tasks to them. So Mike and I are speaking about one task about 2 of the objectives. So I'm going to talk about the objective evaluating replicated Scion trials, and I'm only talking about one task of that. And Mike is talking about one task of evaluating replicated rootstock trials, which you now know is one of the important steps in order, or essential steps for citrus breeding. This is a flow chart, and I don't expect you to take it in, but to show you just how complex it is from the start of initiating phase all the way to the release phase of a new cultivar. And it can take multiple years, and especially depending upon how you initiate that variation. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about what was the impetus of, or the catalyst for the talk today. So Glenn Wright and I have a publication that just came out yesterday, I think. It's called Lemon Returns, and it is the final summary of our California desert lemon trial that went on for 11 years. And it was a trial at a single location, a lemon trial at a single location. And it provided both the catalyst for what I'm going to tell you today on about the Scion trials, and it also provided information that helped us decide which cultivars to include in that trial. So the desert lemon trial, the goal of that was to provide the industry with information on tree growth, yield, pack out, and the fruit quality characteristics for a number of selected lemon varieties in the California desert. And we picked the initial set of varieties based on work that both I had done as part of objective number 4 to evaluate introduced varieties from other parts of California and other parts of the world, and work that Glenn had done in Arizona. It was initiated in 2005. It had 12 different lemon selections in it, most that were planted in 2006, and one that was planted a year later. It had 20 trees of each of the 12 selection, and all of them were on MAC rootstock or macrophylla rootstock in 5 groupings of 4 trees per selection. And one of the things we learned along the way is that over having multiple year trials, which becomes very important, is that there were some high yielding cultivars that had other positive attributes. So, and these were decided to be selected to include in this multi-location trial. So that's Corona Foothill, Walker, Limoneira Fino 49, and Interdonato. Interdonato wasn't as exactly high yielding, but it had a lot of other characteristics. And we included the standard in that initial trial, which was Limoneira 8A, or what I'll call 8A. But this new one actually has an irradiated selection, or a selection that was developed in the breeding program that Mike played a role in, and it is called 8AIR1. And so I will be talking about these 6 cultivars. Okay, and so we have in this multi-location lemon Scion trials, we have 4 different locations. And there are 6 lemon cultivars that I just mentioned on 3 different rootstocks. So the rootstocks vary slightly from one location to the other, but Cruzo is present in all of the locations. These trees were planted in 2015, and since there are 6 lemon cultivars and 3 rootstocks, there are 18 Scion rootstock combinations. So the locations are the Coachella Valley Agricultural Research Station, which I'll refer to as CVARS, Rancho La Cuesta, which is a Limoneira property in Santa Paula, which I'll refer to as Santa Paula, the UCR Agriculture Experiment Station, adjacent to where we work, which I'll call Riverside, and the Lindcove Research and Extension Center, which I'll call Lindcove. The Packline data was collected from fruit harvested from Richard Bagdasarian for fruit harvested at CVARS. Lindcove's Packline was used for Lindcove. The Oxford Lemon Packline was used for Limoneira fruit, and Villa Park Orchard Association in Riverside for fruit harvested UCR. We have all sorts of data that we've collected, including tree size, health data, fruit quality data, and Packline data as well. And I am going to talk a little bit about Packline data and colored, just Packline data, and mostly I'm going to refer to yield data today, because I'd like you to see the differences between which cultivars are producing the highest yield so far. And I'm going to show you both cumulative yield in some of the locations and just 2021 data in other ones. So pictured on the left, you see one of the sites. This is the Rancho La Cuesta site trial, or one of our locations that's at Limoneira. Okay, so this is the first of the yield data that I wanted to show you. And so, when you look at a when you look at a chart like this, you're seeing this is cumulative yield from the 2017-18 season through the 2020 one season. So those are represented by different colors on top of each other. So you can see the cumulative yield. And if they share a letter, so if they have both an A and an AB, that means they're not significantly different. But if they do not share that letter, that means they are significantly different or significantly lower in the case of between Corona and 8A IR1, which is the seedless selection. So this is for CVARS and it's cumulative, and you can see the ones that are basically showing the highest yield over a number of seasons based on the Scion alone is both Corona, Foothills, and Pheno 49. I'm going to go a little faster, but I just want to show you the differences. So this is looking at that same yield, but based on the rootstock. Is there a difference due to the rootstock? And you can see that there actually is a difference that MAC, those that are grown on MAC rootstock actually have much higher cumulative yield than those grown on Volk or Carrizo, which are the three rootstocks at CVARS. And then this complicated chart is to show you those 18 different combinations. And if you look at the ones that are sticking out on the top, the ones that have the highest yield, cumulative yield, you can see the one Pheno 49 on MAC is the one that is the highest one that has the highest total cumulative yield. And that's followed by ones like Corona on MAC, and also 8A on MAC, which is our standard, and as well as Walker on MAC. Those are all not significantly different from each other. Now we're going to switch and look at a different site, and this is only for the 2019-20 year that I ended up showing you here, and I wanted to show you that that in this case, there's slightly difference going on. Again, the three top ones are Corona with the highest yield over both of the dates that season, followed by Pheno 49 and Walker, with those being actually significantly different from Corona than 8A, which is our standard, and which is grown most in California, most common cultivar. And this is the trial based on from 2021. And again, you can see there's similar type pattern with Corona, Foothill, and Pheno 49, and 8A and Walker being not significantly different from each other and having fairly high yield. So this is one of the earlier harvests, but I wanted to show you that there difference. And then this is the 2021 from the same time, showing you both the combination with both the rootstock and the Scion and the rootstock together. And so if you see which ones are sticking out near the top, Corona Foothill on Carrizo is not significantly different than Pheno 49 on Rich, or Corona on Rich, and Walker on Rich, and there are a couple others. Any of them that share the A are not significantly different. So there are a number of ones that are yielding fairly well. And then there's one that's yielding very poorly, and that's Yen Ben on Carrizo, which was selected for this trial because it has very fine textured rind. It's a very pretty fruit, but it also has incompatibilities with a number of rootstocks that we have found. As you can see, that a number of them have very low yield. Okay, now we're at the third location. So we've gone from CVARS to now at Lindcove. And this is another one showing cumulative yield based on the Scion alone. And again, you can see that Walker is one that stands out, but is significantly larger cumulative yield than Corona Foothills that was one of the higher yielding ones at the other locations, but that Walker is not significantly different in terms of cumulative yield than Limoneira 8A. But again, you see Yanben yielded very poorly over all the years together. So now when you break it down and you look at both the rootstock and the Scion together, from this cumulative years from 2016-17 year through 2019-20, you can see that Walker on C35 stands out, as does Walker on Rich. And a number of the other ones are still fairly high yielding and are not significantly different. Everything that shares an A, but they're not quite as high yielding as those two combinations. Okay, then the last of the locations is Santa Paula. I'm showing you things quickly, but just mostly to get you an impression so that you can understand when we start pulling these together and writing publications that you'll have an understanding of the basics. Okay, so this is at Santa Paula over 3 different dates within a season. And you can see again, Yanben yielded was very low yielding. And that Walker and Limoneira 8A were fairly high in yield, followed by Corona and Pheno. So again, Walker at this location is yielding better than something like Limoneira 49 or Corona. But I'm not showing you statistical differences at this time. And if you look at the rootstock, there's a clear difference between the rootstock. Clearly these two, Macrophylla and Swingle, those trees grown on these two rootstocks produce higher yield than those grown on Carrizo. And when you see the combination together, you can see there are some that stand out. Again, Corona on Mac, and 8A on Mac, and 8A on Swingle, and Walker on Mac, and Walker on Swingle are combinations that are higher yielding than the others over these 3 different harvest dates within that season. Now I want to show you from this one location, Santa Paula, and we have data like this for all of the locations, as well as tree size data, fruit quality data, and fruit color data, that I wanted to show you some pack out data. And I put some arrows here to the left so you can see which ones are producing size characteristics that are ones that are beneficial, are ones we're looking for, things like size 95, 115, and 140 and 165. So you can see that the one that stands out here up at this point, 8A and Corona Foothill and Pheno 49 have our cultivars that produce fruit in those categories that are beneficial to commercially beneficial. You can actually break this down the same way I did with yield, and you can show it by rootstock. And again, you can see that Swingle and Macrophylla produce fruit in the categories that are ones that we found more beneficial than others, because they have more fruit in the categories of 95, 115, 140, and into 165. And then here, this complicated one, of course, you can see that there are all different, all 18 combinations are here, but the 3 that stand out are Corona Foothills on Swingle, Pheno 49 on Carrizo, and Limoneira 8A, the standard on Carrizo. And this is at this point in the trial. This trial is just getting going. And we will continue to get a better picture as these trees continue to mature. I want to tell you one other thing, which is that we just planted a new trial in the in the first week of June. It is actually at the same locations. And these trees were budded in October in 2019 and May 2020. So you can see it takes a long time to get trials going so that they, till they're ready to plant in the ground. And this has a number of what we call IR1, which are those seedless selections that were developed by mutagenesis, which was the way that we created the variation. And there is an Allen Eureka IR1, a Walker Lisbon IR1, Limoneira Pheno 49 IR1, since these cultivars, before their mutation was showing promise, and a low thorn, low seeded lemon IR1. I've given you the VIs of these, and they're compared against the standards of each one of those cultivars. We have a number of different rootstocks that are being included in this new trial that was just planted: Flying Dragon, Volk, Carrizo, Mac, Benton, Rich, 16.6, C35, and Swingle. And that would depend upon the location. And I've given you a picture of some of these new ones that are seedless selections. And here's some initial fruit quality data that was done on, not as part of this trial, but earlier. And you can see that they have very low seed numbers, but they vary in things like juice percentage, juice weight, and rind texture slightly different. Okay, so the last major thing I want to show you is that I wanted to mention that one of the things I do, both as the curator of the citrus variety collection and as part of this project, is that I monitor new varieties that are released. Some of them have been released from the citrus variety collection, but I wanted to show you some that are now available through the CCPP's early release program. VI 924 is Excalibur Red Lime, which is a rank per kumquat hybrid that is fairly small, like egg-shaped, and it is an acid fruit, but it is very pretty on tree, and it is seedy, but it is a nice acid fruit. There's also a lemon that was part of the Desert Lemon trial, and it was included in Desert Lemon trial, so there is data on that, and that's Feminella Santa Teresa. It's now available so that growers could plant it if they're interested. And there are two other red pigmented citrus. One is Shahani Red Navel. So it's a red navel that you see on the far right here. Very nice flavor, very pretty fruit. And both of them were featured in a Citrograph article in the fall of 2020, including the other one, which is called Amoa 8, which is more of an ornamental and can look sort of rusty looking on the outside, but it has the deepest red coloration of anything I've seen in California. Okay, thank you so much for your support, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we don't have any questions at this time, so I think what we'll do is move on to the next speaker.
Okay, well, I don't have to introduce the people since Tracy has already done that, and they're really the same, largely the same groups that work on these two aspects, although probably my group takes a bit more of a lead on a lot of the rootstock aspects than we do on the Scion, which has been more shared. So I want to just go over a few things to think about when you're trying to choose a rootstock for lemon. That's a important initial decision for new plantings. You have to consider compatibility. This is a particularly important issue for lemons, but also the effects of the rootstock on the fruit quality. Some Scions have higher fruit quality, and you can use different rootstocks with those than a Scion with a less desirable fruit quality, where you might have to choose a rootstock to try to correct whatever's wrong with it. Fruit size certainly also is more important for some Scions than others. Think about what stresses are present in your site. Soil stresses, such as whether the soil is calcareous, and we'll see examples of that. Salinity and drainage issues. Climate, particularly freeze probability, but I think drought is becoming a very important issue as well. And what diseases are present. These are the major pathogens that we either have now or expect to at least continue to worry about for in the case of HLB. You need to consider the effects of rootstocks on fruit size and color, try to eliminate what are unacceptable choices, and then also always keep in mind that local experience is a very important guide, and sometimes local really means local, and I'll point out some examples of that shortly. So these are some lists of the rootstocks that are commonly used in California. Our major rootstocks over here in the first column. The second column has minor kind of rootstocks that are not typically very widely used. And then we have a set of new rootstocks, some of which we'll talk about in the trials. Some of these I'm not actually sure if they're available. For example, the Forner Alcaide 5 is a rootstock from Spain. It's possible that this is available from some nurseries under patent agreements. I don't think it's publicly available though in California. And there's now some new rootstocks coming from, originating from breeding programs in Florida. And some of these have HLB tolerance, which could be of considerable interest in those in new plantings. But we don't yet have too much experience with those in California. I'm not going to go over these tables here of the some of the characteristics of the major rootstocks. These are copied out of the citrus production manual, so you can see those and peruse them at your leisure. But these are important things to think about. These are general characteristics, but because of site effects, a lot of these characteristics, particularly yield and tree size, depend a lot on the particular site. And here's a bit more of a list. The one thing I'll mention here are the incompatible Scions. Eurekas, of course, lemons, of course, being incompatible with many trifoliate hybrids and trifoliate. They're relatively short-lived, but that doesn't apply, I think I should point out, to all of them. There are minor rootstocks, Benton, and I think now we have pretty good evidence that C32 Citrange is compatible with Eureka lemons. Macrophylla is listed here in this table and in the manual as having an incompatibility with both Eureka and Lisbon lemons, but this is a little different sort of incompatibility than what's pointed out above, because in the other rootstocks, because it's very delayed. It's I don't know, it's hard to characterize it as to whether it's really incompatibility or just a characteristic of Macrophylla that trees are frequently relatively short-lived. I guess we'll learn a little more about that because we have some trials of mandarins on Macrophylla, and we'll see how they're getting to an age where we might start to see some problems. Okay, so for rootstock trials in California, I'm going to talk in detail about some recent trials, but I thought I should just say a little bit about previous trials for rootstocks for lemons. So the first was planted in 1977. Before I started, I came in 1982 and inherited this trial, which had been planted by Bill Bitters at Lindcove. And I managed that trial for a number of years, and we collected data up through about 1996. The highest yielding rootstock was Rangpur, but many of the trees on Rangpur had eventually declined due to Phytophthora. So it just kind of emphasizes the importance of continuing these kinds of trials for a long enough period to see what are the advantages and what's the longevity of a particular Scion rootstock combination. We had another trial started in 1989 near Santa Paula that has both Limoneira 8A Lisbon and Allen Eureka Scions on a number of rootstocks. We took 5 years of yield data on that trial. For Limoneira 8A, Mac was the highest yielding rootstock, but these others here were listed at about 90% or so of the yield of Mac, so they were pretty close. For Allen, it's a fairly similar situation, although a little bit different set of rootstocks that are fairly close to the yield of trees on Mac. Oh, I see. Let me do something here. We've seen recently, this is a fairly recent phenomenon, but we've seen a lot of bark cracking on all the trees on Eureka. So pretty much regardless of rootstock, they have developed an appearance like this. The trees haven't died yet several years after this started, but it's probably a kind of shell bark disease or something like that. But it didn't affect any of the Lisbons. And the other observation in this trial was that rootstock didn't affect seasonal distribution of fruit to any significant extent. We had another couple more trials, one in Fillmore, near Fillmore, really between Fillmore and Santa Paula, planted in 1993. This was a replant trial, so we went into a site, the old trees were removed with the stumps left in the ground, and then planted new trees in there to see how well new rootstocks could do without fumigation or other chemical control. We didn't collect any yield data on that trial, although we did try. It just seemed too difficult to arrange. But in terms of tree size and health, Swingle was the largest tree in the trial. Bitters, Benton and C35 produced small trees with pretty good survival rates. And there was a recent Citrograph article that gives you some details on that. We also had a trial in 2001 in Oxnard, Limoneira 8A on 26 rootstocks. This purpose of this one was really to evaluate their performance on calcareous soil. Here's an aerial view of the trial site from Google Earth, and you can see that there's an area down at the bottom here which is really very stressful. A lot of the trees have died down there. These trees were interplanted with the existing grower trees, so it's a little hard to interpret it from the aerial view here, but we didn't again collect any yield data, and that was real. We didn't intend to, but we got moderate, about 20% mortality for some of the rootstocks. The most promising from their performance on the calcareous soil and low mortality were ASRT, which is a complex hybrid 639 C146, unreleased rootstock, or at least at the time, Swingle, and C57, also called fir. So that was the data kind of trials of lemon rootstocks we'd had. And so we thought that there's been a lot of planting of lemons, so we thought we should establish a new set of trials. So starting about 2013, we collected seed and grew trees, which resulted in some trials planted at 3 sites in 2016. So there are 11 to 14 rootstocks with 12 replications at these different sites. Here's the trial site in Santa Paula. This is 126 over here. So this is about 4 miles or so west of Santa Paula, kind of in the middle of a grower planting. This is managed and owned by Limoneira. There's a trial at Lindcove. This is kind of on the upper edge of the east edge of the station. This is the hillside here, next to the boundary of the field station. This is the trial, and also one at CVARS. That's this site here. This is the trial at CVARS that Tracy was talking about earlier, so it's really just adjacent to it. I think the thing you can see in these trials is that tree survival has been quite high. We don't have many missing trees there. So I'll talk first a bit about the Santa Paula trial. These are some shots of the overview of the trial taken in October 2020. This trial, again, okay, I should emphasize that the site of this trial is, even though we call it Santa Paula location, it's probably about 7 miles or so away from the trial that Tracy just talked about for the multi-location lemon rootstock Scion trial. So it's really quite a different environment. This is relatively near to the river down there, and the soil is pretty different, and that affected the results. So here are some of the trees. Trees on Mac have performed very well. They're planted on berms, as you can see. This is a tree on bitters. These are the bud unions. No real bud union problems at this point. But what we have seen is that certain, let's see, certain rootstocks, such as Rich 16.6, this tree down here is Rich 16.6, have a lot of chlorosis. Swingle also has a lot of chlorosis, but some other rootstocks don't. And I think this is a bulk over here. It's another one of the ones that has done well. So now turning to some of the data, here's the growth of the trees shown as canopy volume. I haven't labeled all these with letters. The statistical significance of differences is roughly proportional to the size of these bars here. This is a statistic called the LSD. And so if the difference is larger than the bar height within the color group, then there's a difference. And so you can see that the largest trees are those on Volk. Mac and Carrizo are also pretty good size now. A lot of the others are fairly similar, but it's notable that Rich 16.6 is pretty small, and Bitters is also producing a smaller tree. But of course, you don't care just about growing a big tree, or a tree size isn't the only issue. We got to know what the fruit is like. In this trial, we harvested individual trees, but then the fruit from all the individual trees were bulked according to the rootstock. And so then these are the bins of fruit that represent the yield produced by the trees on that rootstock in December 2020. And then you can see there's some pretty big differences. Here's Macrophylla with a bin plus a little bit. Nothing else had more than one bin, and some things like Rich is pretty low. Bulk is at pretty good yield. Sunky Flying Dragon was fairly promising here. So this is Rich. You can see the relatively small production. Looking at that in a bar graph of the same sort that Tracy showed, you can see the highest overall yields were trees on Mac, followed by Volk. A lot of the others are fairly similar, but notable. Rich 16.6 has pretty low yields, as we saw in those images of the bins of fruit. This is now the same data, but shown as the cumulative yield by season, whether the fruit We've generally done 3 harvests per year at this location, so we can divide that up between summer, winter, and spring. Typically, the spring harvest has been the largest, counted for most of the production. There's not really enormous differences in between the rootstocks in the proportions of fruit, although I think you're seeing Mac producing a bit more in the winter harvest than most of the others, even proportionally. But that isn't the only absolute yield from trees at a standard planting density is not the only important character. It's also valuable to look at the performance of the trees by the relationship between yield and canopy volume. And so in this graph, this is a graph of the averages for all the rootstocks in the trial, the canopy volume on the x-axis and the cumulative yield on the y-axis. And you can see the low yield and small tree size of Rich 16.6 here. Fairly large trees with high yield for Volk and Mac. Carrizo has produced a pretty large tree, but the yield of the trees on Carrizo at this location is not nearly as good as the trees on these lemon tripe rootstocks. There's a large group of rootstocks in the center here that are not very different from one another in their yield efficiency, as we often call this. But then we have one other example here of bitters, which has yield that's pretty comparable to this whole group, but on a tree size that is much smaller. So that's an indication that trees that are up in this sort of quadrant of this type of graph are much more efficient, producing a good yield from a smaller tree. Now, this is only 3 years or so of data, so it's important to continue this before we reach permanent conclusions, but promising at this point. Here are the tree health ratings. Again, taken at 4 different dates, and again, you can see what's significant, but these are all mostly pretty good health ratings, with the exception of those for Rich, which are down in the 2.5 to 3 range. So the trees on Rich certainly seem to have a health problem, and that's to a great extent due to chlorosis, particularly iron chlorosis. So this is the ratings of chlorosis per year in different years. You can see that July 2019, this kind of orangish brown colored bars are generally high, but it's not seen in later ratings. But what you can the really important difference is Rich 16.6 and to a bit lesser extent Swingle have a substantial part of the canopies with a lot of iron chlorosis. So even though the water is acidified, the grower trees that surround this are on Carrizo, and their soil, the combination of the soil and the certain rootstocks such as Rich and Swingle that are very susceptible to iron chlorosis are not performing well here. Remember, Swingle was among the better trees in some of our other trials, and including the one that Tracy talked about, but those trials are located on a different soil type about 5 to 7 miles away. So we have similar kinds of pack-out data to that which Tracy showed. So here's the pack-out by size for fruit harvested in the spring of 21. And so you can see that here they're ranked by fruit size. So the larger size fruit are again predominant on Volk and Macrophylla. Sunky Flying Dragon and Bitters are close, similar in the proportion of larger size fruit. Whereas Rich 16.6 is notable in how, and Swingle notable in how small the fruit size is. And here's pack out by color. The rootstocks here are ranked by the proportion of green fruit. So the proportion of green fruit, which are this end of the bar here basically, is highest with Macrophila X639. Volk are pretty good. Carrizo is pretty good in its proportion. They change the relatively little differences between rootstocks here, but you can see a big difference here again with Rich 16.6 and having a very small proportion of green fruit in comparison. Also, bitters is the proportion of green fruit is not so high. This, to some extent, of course, what it might mean if you had a grove on C22 bitters, you might want to harvest those fruit a bit earlier. It had good fruit size. Okay, so that was the Santa Paula trial. I'm going to turn next to the Lindcove trial, which is, here's some trees, Carrizo, bitters, fir, and bud unions. Again, we haven't seen too much problem with bud unions at this fairly young tree age. Trees generally look pretty good in this trial. Here's the canopy volume. The largest trees were on Carrizo. At this location, we don't have trees on Mac and Volk. That was at the recommendation of a panel of growers because these rootstocks are too susceptible to freeze damage in the San Joaquin Valley. And here's the cumulative yield at Lindcove. And the largest yield in this case was from trees on bitters. And we've seen that in some other trials at this location. Others with good yield are C57 fir and Rich 16.6. So this is a location which doesn't cause essentially any iron chlorosis. So we're seeing really big differences in performance there. And here's the kind of graph of canopy volume versus yield. A whole group down here in with a kind of standard relationship, but there's a cluster of 3 varieties here. C22 bitters, 1449, and Rich all have quite high yields relative to their tree size, whereas Carrizo is relatively disappointing yield relative to its tree size. Here are the health ratings, which aren't too different among these different rootstocks. The last trial I was going to talk about is the CVARS lemon trial, rootstock trial, but I will kind of go over this very quickly. I'll leave the slides in and you can look at those later. Here's cumulative yield, with it being highest for Mac and Volk and lower for all the rest. And here's the canopy volumes of those trees. Again, Mac and Volk are the largest trees as well as the highest yielding. And here's the graph of canopy volume versus yield. Again, C22 bitters and 1449 have pretty good yield relative to the tree size. Okay, so here's some pack out data on CVARS, which I see I'm getting pretty short on time, so I won't really talk about that. I did want to just try to compare these locations now. So here's the same data we've already seen, but all on one graph. So these are the yield at each of the different locations. And you can see which rootstocks were superior. Some, of course, some rootstocks aren't present at all the locations, but a lot of them are. And I think the thing to notice here is the relatively low yield of essentially all the rootstocks at CVARS. The CVARS yield has not been comparable to the yield to the yield at other locations for many rootstocks. And here's the canopy volume, which is a very different story, because the trees at CVARS are much larger than the trees at the other locations. So even though these are, we seem to be having a problem with fruit set or fruit retention at CVARS, because we've made nice, large, and generally pretty healthy trees, but they're not setting good crops. And we don't really have an idea at this point why that is. I thought, you know, we just remind you, here are the canopy volume. So these canopy volume numbers, what do these really look like for trees? So I included here an example of trees grown at these 3 locations. This is the average tree size and shape for carrizo at Lindcove, Santa Paula, and CVARS. And then these are the canopy volume measurements. And I think to some extent, particularly what's happening at Lindcove is the trees are pruned quite regularly and to a greater extent than they are at other places. I think maybe the trees don't grow as fast at Lindcove as they do at CVARS because of the climate differences, but the pruning is likely somewhat responsible for these big differences in tree size. So to summarize, adaptation of rootstocks to the soil is pretty critical when choosing a rootstock. You can have relative performance differences that are quite large over distances of less than 1 mile. One of those older trials is quite near to the Santa Paula rootstock trial, and we don't see much iron chlorosis problem at the other trial site. And the San Joaquin Valley is quite different from the desert in Ventura. MAC has performed well in the desert in Ventura, but it's very sensitive to freezes. We know that from lots of other previous trials. Volk's a kind of compromised choice, which has some of the attributes of MAC, but is a bit more freeze tolerant. These 3 rootstocks appear promising for higher density plantings where they're well adapted. But you need to definitely worry about the soil. Trifoliate hybrids generally have better disease tolerance for all these pathogens than MAC and Volk, but you know, there are compromises in other traits. Again, remember, these are pretty young trials, only planted in 2016, and diseases are likely to become increasingly influential in affecting tree performance as the trees age. We've seen that in quite a few other trials. Okay, I think that's the end. We can go to the next topic or questions. I'm a little bit unclear now exactly what comes next, but.
We can start to take questions. We do have many questions here actually, so quite a bit to get through. This question is for both Tracy and Mike. The question is, are you taking into account psyllid and HLB resistance or susceptibility?
You want to go first, Mike, or you want me to?
Well,
because yours
sure, I can,
lends itself to that more.
Okay, it's we're certainly making crosses with the intent of developing new Scion varieties, including acid fruit types that will have HLB tolerance. At this point, it's still quite difficult to test HLB tolerance on large numbers of trees in California. We can't do anything in the field. We can only work in the in a BSL-3, which has pretty limited space. We can pay attention a bit to what's been found in Florida. There are a number of acid types of fruit in Florida that do seem to be more tolerant of HLB, but they don't. Unfortunately, our commercial lemon is not particularly tolerant. It's not terrible, but it's probably better than oranges, but it's not great. So we're certainly making other crosses, but this, as a solution, this part is still a number of years away in the future. Now for rootstocks, we try to make crosses involving parents that in Florida have been shown to be tolerant. So we're trying to develop tolerant material, but we have the same kind of issue that it's difficult to test this material in California. As material comes out from the MAC project, and the CRB MAC project combined, which moved a lot of material from Florida to California. As that material comes out, we want to do trials with that material so we can get a better idea how a lot of those selections from Florida behave in California.
Yeah, and the only thing I want to add to that is that maybe emphasize, I mean, Mike and I are part of the same project, so we all think about these things together, but he didn't talk, he just mentioned the BSL-3 facility. That's, our project is utilizing that, but again, it's limited in space and availability. And the other thing to think about is that, yes, lemons, many of the things that are the part of this MAC project that's bringing in cultivars, many of those are not lemons, they're other types. So it wouldn't really relate to lemons as much. But they will be valuable for us to get information on. And part of what we're proposing is starting to do some preliminary evaluations of the fruit quality so we can see how some of those perform, especially at least initially at Lindcove.
This next question is for Cindy. The question is, do you think we will ever be able to mulch in Tulare County citrus?
Well, I really can't answer that question because I don't know enough about why you couldn't mulch in Tulare. I think that I don't serve Tulare, so I don't really know about the situation, if there's a reason why people can't mulch. But generally, you can mulch. I actually have trials in several other countries with very different eco zones. So I don't know why.
So Cindy, when you say mulch, you mean organic mulches, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Or organic materials, not plastic mulches.
Yes, any porous organic material, whether it's wood chips, shredded chipped prunings. We use 50% horse manure, composted horse manure in our trials. A lot of people use that because that's something readily available. In other areas where there's dairies, people use composted dairy manure.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. The next question is, what is the percentage, I think the word is supposed to be, of the low thorn, low seeded variety?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We are not absolutely sure. Okay, the origin of that is that Tim Williams selected a lemon tree in a planting out next to one of our fields at Riverside that he thought was a Lisbon type, but it had a lot less thorns than a regular Lisbon. And that was then used as source of budwood for radiation to make it low seeded. But we've been unable to find any record. It's not our planting, but we've been unable to find any record of what the lemon was that was planted there, whether it was a Eureka or a Lisbon, or which selection of each of those it would be. I did some marker work on this that suggested it was more likely a Eureka than a Lisbon, but it's not absolutely definitive. So we are still a bit uncertain. So that's why it has that peculiar name.
Okay, thank you. Tracy, did you want to add anything to that, or should I move on?
No, I think that's great that he added the marker data, that I hadn't remembered that. That's great.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm not sure who this question is. I'm sure either of you could answer it. It is, are you looking at Scion and rootstock compatibility?
Yes. And especially in the case of the trial that Mike is talking about, which is a rootstocks trial. But yes, even in our trial, in the Scion trial, that's all of our trials, our Scion trials, we have 3 rootstocks. So it doesn't have as many rootstocks, but we have multiple Scions. You saw we had 18 combinations. And we do have, I just didn't talk about that. I chose to talk about sort of the yield data mostly. But we have all sorts of similar data to what Mike showed you as well. But I thought it would be good for you to see that that different cultivar and different cultivar combinations with rootstocks yielded differently in different locations.
I'll just add, when we were propagating trees for the trial that Tracy talked about, we discovered some things because we wanted to test Interdonato. Interdonato is an Italian variety that we thought would be of interest because it has resistance or tolerance to Malseco. And so we wanted to know, if we got Malseco, could we grow Interdonato? Well, what we learned is we can't grow Interdonato on any of our common rootstocks, because all the trifoliate hybrids that we grafted it on, we could hardly get trees coming out of the nursery. They were so incompatible. Maybe Yenben also has some very peculiar looking bud unions that I think are associated with its relatively poor performance. So, but among the common lemons, the compatibility issues tend to be more delayed. They're not something we would see very much at this early stage.
Yeah, the Yenben, I did have some pictures of that to show that the strange looking rootstock Scion combinations, but I didn't end up inserting that. But yeah, we have a few pictures that indicate that.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is there any info on non-irradiated Eureka/root varieties?
I'm not sure I understand.
And that question.
We haven't done it's certainly, I think the question is mainly about compatibility of Eureka with and performance with different rootstocks. We haven't done a regular rootstock trial with Eurekas for a number of years. The new trial that was just being planted, which Tracy mentioned, will include Allen Eureka, a non-irradiated Allen Eureka, as well as the Allen Eureka IR1 selection that should be low seeded. So we will get some performance on a small set of rootstocks from those trials. We really have, there's a sort of a problem of just, is it valuable enough to spend our resources doing a large rootstock trials with Eurekas? And so far, I guess I haven't just thought that it was. So that's why we don't have larger ones. I mean, it's going to be done at the cost of not doing something else, because we can only do so much.
Right. and it's hard to see, but there's a tremendous amount of effort to do these harvests and all the stages that happen, which is why I showed you sort of the complex ideas of what it takes to get something to fruition as a new cultivar. It's very complex, but wonderfully, we have a wonderful group of people who work together on this.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is the best way to receive a copy of the final CVARS report?
That might be in the desert rootstock trial.
Or do they mean a copy of this presentation or a copy of the CVAR? We generally don't have CVAR reports. We write reports for the CRB, and maybe that's what they'd like to see.
Perhaps so. I don't have any other clear information besides that, so maybe that is what they're referring to.
Okay, I should comment that the whole presentation will be put on the CRB website, and so if you want to look at some of the slides like that I showed from CVARS or Tracy showed, you could look at the open the presentation and just stop it when you get to a slide you want to look at in more detail, even though we're not talking about it still.
And also, we will be publishing in Citrograph. So Citrograph is a wonderful source of information for growers, because that's where we publish the work we've done for the CRB, is that we publish it there. And that's one reason I highlighted the new Desert Lemon Trial article, which is our final summary, so that you could check out that one that just came out.
Okay. And then just a question of clarification from one of our attendees. When you refer to swingle, is that 1449?
No, this is swingle is a citromolo, so it's a hybrid between a trifoliate and a grapefruit. And there is a form, which I think, as far as I know, is the same thing as what we call swingle, called 4475. And so you're getting the numbering name mixed up with it. So whereas 1449 is a citramon, which means that it's a hybrid between a trifoliate and a lemon. And it's been around for a long time. It's not a new rootstock. It's only been used some with lemons, but it's a different kind of hybrid than a swingle.
Okay. This next question is for Cindy. Did you include mulch on the soil for any, oh wait, maybe this isn't for Cindy. It could be for the others as well. Did you include mulch on the soil for any of these trials? Is that in the future? If not?
So another part of our project that is run by Peggy Mock has a trial in Riverside where she is using mulch and comparing the use of mulch and berms with each other. And those trees are caracara trees. For this trial, they are on berms. I think, Mike, you know more about what kind of mulch they use.
It's variable. Yeah, it's variable. I think the mulch in the Riverside multi-location trial is
right,
ground up wood chips kind of thing. In the desert, we haven't used mulch in the desert. They say it doesn't last very long because it's so hot. You'd have to keep putting mulch on every 2 months or something. I don't know. Anyway, that's what I'm told. We don't have any further knowledge about that. And I guess the, like Santa Paula, those trials, it's interesting because adjacent to our rootstock trial is a huge mulching operation, but Limoneira didn't particularly want to use mulch on the trials. So I think that most of the trials in Ventura County have not used mulch. I don't know we had a discussion with them. We didn't ask them to use mulch, as far as I can remember anyway. But it would probably be, I think it'd be a good idea. When you did one trial in Riverside where we used a combination of mulches, although some of that was a plastic mulch, and berms, and that really convinced us that these were valuable practices. And ever since, we've been doing a lot of our breeding on trials on berms with a wood chip mulch.
And you should explain, because the trees get going earlier.
Yeah, the trees are more productive quicker. That's been a particular thing we've noticed. And they're also, maybe this is a berm effect, not a mulch effect, but they're more freeze tolerant.
Okay, the next question is what causes the chlorosis for the swingle and rich rootstocks?
The soil pH, well, it's probably a combination of soil, but I think it's mostly the soil has calcium carbonate in it for a certain amount. And this affects the ability of certain rootstocks to take up iron. So they become iron deficient, and that's what leads to that symptom. And it's related to the pH of the soil and the presence of, which is related to the presence of calcium carbonate in the soil. To some extent, you can manage that by acidifying the water, which they are already doing. But it's adequate for some rootstocks, but it's not adequate for those two. Trifoliate is the most susceptible thing we have to that problem. It's more common in Ventura, I think, than most other production areas in California, but it's not unique to Ventura by any means.
Okay. The next question is, any info on rootstocks that produce smaller trees that are highly productive?
Well, based on these trials, I think people should be trying this bitters. We've recognized that, and it's been true with other Scions as well. But doesn't produce a tiny tree. I mean, if you really want a tree that never gets so large you have to use ladders, then you're onto Flying Dragon. And we don't have another alternative that's as dwarfing as Flying Dragon. But the Flying Dragon trees, they grow slowly, and I think that's the main reason it hasn't been widely adopted commercially, is just that the tree growth is too slow. So we've made lots of hybrids with Flying Dragon, but we have not got good rootstocks out of it that are productive. No, what you want is biologically difficult, because what you really want is a tree that grows really fast for 5 years and then stops and just produces fruit. But we haven't been able to find that.
Okay. This next question is, how long is Mike's trial supposed to last? And why was the 77 trial ended?
Oh, you bring up a sore point there. I don't know how long my trial will last. There's another, and then there is still another question of who's going to take over the trial. It'll last longer than I do, probably, but I don't know.
Mike,
anyway.
you want to explain that we do have other, like, you might want to explain about Denell Seymour as a citrus.
Sure. I mean, there are other
people part of our group
involved, so hopefully we're in a reasonable situation to continue the projects. We don't really have a trial. You try to keep it as long as it's providing new information. I don't have any information to the extent that, for example, the Limoneira will want to remove the trees, or that UCR plant intends to sell the Coachella Valley Field Station, so we can't have a trial there anymore. So as far as I know, these are long-term trials. Whether we'll continue to take yield records for 20 years, I'm less sure about that. But at least we'll keep the trees to observe as we have with other trials. Now, why was the 77 trial ended? Because the committee that oversees projects at Lindcove decided that they wanted to end that trial because it was old enough. We had enough. They thought we had enough information. It wasn't my decision. So
Okay.
I'm not sure it would still be there. That's an awful long time, but there's lots of projects. You can only do, Lindcove has X amount of land, and some projects might be a high priority, and if you keep everything forever, you can't start new stuff. So.
Okay, and this last question is, what is the frost tolerance of bitters? And before you get into answering that, I just want to point out that we've added the panelist email addresses to the chat. So if your questions didn't get answered during this session, please feel free to ask them over email. Okay. So back to the question is, what is the frost tolerance of bitters?
Well, we haven't had, okay. I think it seems fairly similar to trees on Carrizo to the extent that we can tell. But, we haven't had a really serious freeze at the trial sites for quite a while. So it's a little uncertain. I would say it's a trait for which we don't have real definitive data, but we probably had, of the trees I'm thinking about, which have been through a serious freeze, they performed about like Carrizo trees. They're not as tolerant as trifoliate, but they're not bad.
Okay. Tracy, did you want to add
I may
that?
try to answer some of the
Okay.
questions, through typing answers if you leave the chat up. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Okay.
tried to type one in and it didn't look like I could do it. Type the
Oh.
answer in because but I don't know if we can do that because I looked at those. There was one.
You should be able. I will leave it open. You should be able to respond in typing. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. So with that, I think I will hand this over to Melinda to close out the webinar series. And if you want, we can stay on a little longer so you can type in questions to those or answers to those questions rather. But Melinda, would you like to take it from me now?
Sure. So on behalf of the Citrus Research Board, I want to thank Cindy, Tracy, and Mike for sharing their information with our participants at today's webinar. I want to thank all the participants for staying on an additional 40 minutes. It's been a really good discussion going on. So thank you to our experts there, and for those in the industry interested in learning more. It's always fun hearing about new varieties and what's going on in different parts of the state. Please mark your calendars. We are going to have an in-person California Citrus Conference on October 6th here in Visalia, California. For additional information on that, and we're looking forward to seeing everyone, please visit our website at citrusresearch.org, and we'll have more information there. So with that, again, thank you everyone for your participation and interest in this, and thank you to the University of California for all their help in managing these webinars as well. It's been a great series.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Cheryl and Tamara and Melinda. Thank you.
All right, for everyone who.
Thank you, Cindy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so for everyone who would like to leave at this point, have a great rest of your day. And if you have questions, feel free to stick around and wait for answers to be typed, or you can email our presenters. Thank you.